When Judge Andrew Adrenan in Tra tried to publicly mock Pam Bondi in court, he thought it was just another show of power, until Bondi exposed a secret that led to his immediate arrest in front of everyone. The mahogany doors of Courtroom 7A swung open as Judge Andrew H. Stone swept in, his black robes billowing behind him. The packed gallery fell instantly silent, recognizing the notoriously strict federal judge. At 62, Stone carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd spent 23 years on the bench, accumulating both power and enemies. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged chamber. The case, United States. V. Harrington Industries had drawn national attention for weeks. Accusations of corporate fraud, environmental violations, and political bribery dominated the headlines. Judge Stone had been assigned the case after two other judges recused themselves, citing conflicts of interest. At the prosecution's table, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi arranged her documents with methodical precision. At 56, Bondi was known for her unrelenting approach to corporate misconduct. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a professional bun, her navy suit immaculate. "The court recognizes the prosecution," Judge Stone announced, peering over his reading glasses. His tone carried an unmistakable impatience. Bondi rose confidently. "Your Honor, the prosecution moves to introduce newly discovered evidence related to offshore accounts linked directly to the Harrington Industries Executive Board. These documents demonstrate a clear pattern." "Ms. Bondi," Judge Stone interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension, "are you suggesting your office conveniently discovered critical evidence after filing charges? This isn't some television drama where the prosecutor miraculously finds smoking guns during commercial breaks." Several attorneys exchanged glances. Stone's animosity toward Bondi had been rumored in legal circles, but this public display surprised even courthouse veterans. "Your Honor," Bondi continued evenly, "these financial records were obtained through proper channels following warrants approved by Judge Martinez last week. The timing is convenient, isn't it?" Stone cut in, removing his glasses dramatically. "Perhaps next week you'll discover Jimmy Hoffa's remains in the defendant's basement." Nervous laughter rippled from the defense table. Bondi's junior associate stiffened, but she maintained her composure. "With respect, Your Honor, the prosecution's motion is both procedurally sound and substantively relevant. Supreme Court precedent in Davidson v. Illinois clearly establishes—" "I don't need a first-year law school lecture on precedent, Ms. Bondi," Stone snapped. "I've been applying Davidson since before you passed the bar." The courtroom tensed. Judge Stone's reputation for strictness was well known, but this was personal. Defense counsel sat back, clearly pleased by the judge's hostility. "Your motion is denied," Stone declared, banging his gavel with unnecessary force. "This court won't entertain last-minute fishing expeditions to salvage a flimsy case." Bondi remained standing. "Your Honor, I respectfully request the basis for this denial be entered into the record." A muscle twitched in Stone's jaw. "The basis, Counselor, is judicial discretion, something you might want to familiarize yourself with before your next appearance in my courtroom." As Bondi took her seat, she exchanged a meaningful glance with her chief deputy. The first skirmish had ended in the judge's favor, but something in Bondi's calm expression suggested the battle was far from over. The morning session grew increasingly tense as Judge Stone continued to undercut the prosecution. Each time Bondi rose to speak, his interruptions became more pointed, his dismissals more personal. The pattern was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. The judge was deliberately trying to humiliate the Attorney General. After sustaining the defense's third consecutive objection, Stone's drawl was practically a sneer. "Perhaps you could enlighten us all. Did you personally prepare for today's hearing, or did you delegate it to the same staff who bungled the Westmore case last spring?" A sharp intake of breath swept through the gallery. The Westmore case, A corruption prosecution that had ended in dismissal was handled by a completely different division of Bondi's office. She hadn't been involved, but Stone was clearly trying to link her to the failure. "Your Honor," Bondi replied with measured calm, "the prosecution team for this case has prepared thoroughly based on substantial evidence. The Westmore matter involved different attorneys and entirely different circumstances." Stone leaned forward, his fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin. "Indeed, because from where I sit, I see the same pattern of overreach and under-preparation." He gestured toward the defense table. "Counsel for Harrington Industries shouldn't have to defend against shifting allegations and moving targets." Bondi's second chair, Martin Reeves, subtly pushed a note in front of her. She glanced down, didn't react, and looked back at the judge. "For the record," she said clearly, "the prosecution objects to the characterization of our case as shifting or unprepared. We have filed all motions in accordance with federal rules and disclosed all evidence according to discovery requirements." Stone chuckled, humorless. "Noted for the record, Counselor. I'm sure the appellate court will find your objection. Fascinating when this case inevitably reaches them after your office's overcharging leads to reversible error." Several spectators exchanged uneasy glances. Even the court reporter paused, fingers hovering over the stenotype machine. "Your Honor," Bondi continued, her voice unwavering, "may I request a brief sidebar?" "Denied," Stone replied instantly. "There's nothing you need to say that can't be heard by everyone present." He gestured broadly to the packed courtroom. "Transparency is essential to our justice system. Wouldn't you agree, Ms. Bondi?" Behind her professional demeanor, a flicker of calculation crossed Bondi's face. She nodded once to her team before, responding, "I couldn't agree more about transparency, Your Honor," she said, her voice taking on a new edge of determination. "In fact, transparency is precisely what this case is about." Judge Stones narrowed his eyes slightly, perhaps sensing something in her tone. He glanced at his watch ostentatiously. "Well, since we're getting nowhere with the prosecution's inadequate motions, let's break for lunch. Court will reconvene at 1:30. He banged his gavel and stood to leave. As the gallery began to clear, Bondi's team huddled closely together, speaking in urgent whispers. Across the room, reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, clearly aware they were witnessing something unprecedented. The defense attorneys, initially pleased by the judge's hostility toward the prosecution, now exchanged uneasy looks. Something about Bondi's composed reaction to the judicial onslaught suggested she wasn't as defenseless as Judge Stones seemed to believe. When court reconvened after lunch, the atmosphere had shifted. Suddenly, the gallery was filled beyond capacity, with several additional reporters squeezing into the back row. Bondi's team returned with 2 new attorneys no one recognized and a stack of blue folders that hadn't been present during the morning session. Judge Stones swept in with the same imperious air, seemingly unaware of the changing dynamics. "Miss Bondi, are you prepared to move forward without wasting more of this court's time?" he asked, the mockery in his voice unmistakable. "Yes, Your Honor," Bondi replied, rising with deliberate slowness. "The prosecution requests permission to address a matter of immediate concern regarding these proceedings." Stones waved, his hand dismissively. "Make it quick, Counselor. The defense has actual substantive motions awaiting our attention." Bondi nodded to one of her assistants, who approached the bench with a bound document. "Your Honor, I'd like to formally request that you recuse yourself from this case, effective immediately." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Judge Stone's face flushed crimson. "On what possible grounds?" he demanded, his voice rising. "On the grounds of demonstrable bias, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and what appears to be a personal financial stake in the outcome of these proceedings," Bondi stated calmly, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom. "This is preposterous," Stone sputtered, banging his gavel repeatedly. "I'll hold you in contempt before—" With respect, Your Honor, Bondi continued unruffled, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A in the document before you. It contains records of 17 separate financial transactions between Meridian Holdings, a shell company registered to your brother-in-law, and a subsidiary of Harrington Industries. The judge froze, gavel in midair. Additionally, Bondi pressed on, Exhibits B through F contain sworn affidavits from 3 former clerks detailing conversations in which you expressed personal animus toward me dating back to the Coastal Petroleum investigation of 2019, which implicated several of your former law partners. The courtroom had become so quiet that the soft whir of the air conditioning seemed thunderous. Even the defense attorneys sat in stunned silence. These documents were filed with the Judicial Conduct Committee 40 minutes ago, Bondi explained, her voice steady but resolute. Copies have also been provided to the Chief Judge of this district and the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section. For the first time since the proceedings began, Judge Stones appeared genuinely shaken. His earlier arrogance evaporated as he flipped through the pages before him. This is a desperate attempt to judge shop, he finally managed. Though his voice lacked conviction, Bondi stood her ground. The prosecution has no interest in judge shopping, Your Honor. We simply require a neutral arbiter as guaranteed by the Constitution and the judicial canons of ethics. She turned slightly, addressing the entire courtroom. The evidence will show that Harrington Industries engaged in systematic fraud that harmed thousands of Americans. That evidence deserves fair consideration, nothing more, nothing less. Nechi turned. Defense attorneys scrambled to their feet, objecting simultaneously, but their protest seemed hollow against Bondi's methodical presentation. In the back of the courtroom, a man in a dark suit who had been observing quietly made a brief phone call before returning his attention to the unfolding drama. Judge Stones appeared to be regaining his composure, straightening his robes and clearing his throat. These allegations are entirely unfounded, he declared, though with noticeably less certainty than before. This motion for recusal is denied. Bondi didn't sit down. Then I must inform the court that we have filed an emergency appeal with the circuit. I believe they're considering it as we speak. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened and a clerk hurried in with an envelope, which he delivered directly to the bench. Judge Stones broke the seal with trembling fingers. As he read its contents, the color drained from his face. The circuit. A court had not only taken up the emergency appeal, but had also ordered an immediate pause in proceedings pending review of Bondi's recusal motion. This court will take a 15-minute recess, he announced, his voice strained. Without further explanation, he retreated to his chambers. The moment the door closed behind him, the courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. Defense attorneys huddled with their clients, while reporters slipped out to file urgent updates. Through it all, Pam Bondi remained composed, reviewing documents with her team. When Stones returned, his earlier arrogance had hardened into defiance. "Court is back in session," he declared, banging his gavel with unnecessary force. "The circuit, court's administrative stay, does not preclude us from addressing outstanding motions." Bondi rose immediately. "Your Honor, with respect, the stay explicitly halts all proceedings until the recusal matter is resolved." "I determine what happens in my courtroom, Miss Bondi," Stone shot back, his tone icy. "Snapped, and I'm not finished addressing your baseless accusations." Bondi nodded to her deputy, who handed her another blue folder. "Perhaps we should discuss Exhibit G, which I was reluctant to introduce publicly." The judge froze. "What are you playing at?" "No games, Your Honor, just evidence." Bondi walked to the bench and placed the folder before him. "These are records of 5 offshore wire transfers from Harrington Industries to Caribbean Holdings, ultimately controlled by Meridian Partners, the same entity mentioned earlier. The defense team shot to their feet, objecting vehemently. But Bondi pressed on, her voice calm and unwavering. The timing of these transfers coincides precisely with 5 major rulings you issued in cases involving Harrington subsidiaries over the past 3 years. Each ruling contradicted established precedent, and each benefited Harrington enormously. A man in the 3rd row stood up, flashing a federal law enforcement badge at the bailiff. He moved quietly to the side aisle, but stayed near the back. "These are outrageous lies," Judge Stone sputtered, but his voice faltered. "The banking records don't lie, Your Honor," Bondi replied evenly. "Nor do the sworn statements from Judges Martinez and Watkins attesting to conversations where you personally requested that Harrington-related cases be assigned to your docket." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even the defense attorneys seemed shaken by the precision of the allegations. "Perhaps most concerning," Bondi continued, "is Exhibit H, a recording of your conversation with Charles Harrington at the Cypress Club last month, where you assured him that my case would never see a jury." Stone's face contorted. That was a private conversation." "Indeed it was," Bondi agreed, "which makes your promise to derail a federal prosecution before the evidence was even presented all the more troubling." The man with the badge was now joined by 2 others, their federal badges identifying them as agents of the FBI's Public Corruption Division. They waited at the back of the courtroom, watching intently. Judge Stones gripped the bench, his knuckles white. "This court is adjourned until further notice," he declared abruptly, standing and turning toward his chambers. "Your Honor," Bondi called out, "there's one more matter requiring immediate attention." But Stones was already halfway to his chambers, ignoring her and the stunned expressions of everyone in the room. The heavy door to the judge's chambers slammed shut with an echo that reverberated through the silent courtroom. For several seconds, no one moved. Defense attorneys exchanged panicked looks with their clients. Court personnel stood frozen at their stations. Even the normally unflappable court reporter had her hands suspended above her stenotype machine. Bondi remained standing, her posture perfectly straight, her expression unreadable. When she finally moved, every eye in the room tracked her. She turned to her team and nodded once. One of her deputies, a serious-looking man with silver-rimmed glasses, opened his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. He crossed to the clerk's desk and handed it over with a quiet instruction. The clerk's eyes widened as she examined the document. "This is," she began, then stopped, clearly unsure how to proceed. "A federal warrant," Bondi said, her voice carrying through the hushed room. "Properly executed by Judge Hernandez of the Southern District this morning." The 3 federal agents at the back moved purposefully forward. The lead agent conferred briefly with Bondi before approaching. "The clerk to review the warrant. Should someone inform the judge?" the clerk asked nervously. "That won't be necessary," the agent replied. "We'll handle it from here." The defense table erupted, attorneys demanding explanations, defendants growing more anxious. Marcus Welford, lead counsel for Harrington Industries, rose to his feet, his face flushed. "This is outrageous. Whatever vendetta the Attorney General is pursuing—" "This isn't a vendetta, Counselor," Bondi interrupted calmly. "It's the culmination of an 8-month investigation by the FBI and the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section." The federal agents moved toward the judge's chambers. The courtroom deputy, uncertain of protocol, hesitated before stepping aside. The lead agent knocked firmly. When no response came, he knocked again, more insistently. "Judge Stones, we have a valid federal warrant. Please open the door immediately." Silence. The gallery had grown so still that when someone shifted in their seat, the faint creak of the wood startled several people. Reporters scribbled frantically, while the court sketch artist's pencil flew across the page. When no response came, the agent nodded to his colleagues. One produced a small tool, and within seconds, the lock clicked open. The agents entered the chambers, closing the door behind them. Bondi turned to address the stunned courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this court is in recess. I ask that everyone remain seated until federal agents complete their duties." The defense table erupted once more. Welford approached Bondi directly, his voice low and furious. "You've orchestrated this entire spectacle, haven't you? Whatever happens to Stones, our clients are still innocent until proven guilty." "I'm well aware of the presumption of innocence, Counselor," Bondi replied evenly. "It applies to everyone, including judges, but it doesn't shield anyone from investigation when the evidence warrants it." A commotion at the door to the chambers drew everyone's attention. The door had swung open again, and the federal agents emerged, blanking Judge Andrew H. Stones. The judge's face was ashen, his posture rigid with shock and fury. More striking than his expression, however, were the metal handcuffs glinting on his wrists. "Andrew H. Stones," the lead agent announced formally, "you are under arrest for violations of Title 18, United States Code, Sections 2012, pertaining to judicial corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Several jurors covered their mouths in shock. The bailiff, a 20-year veteran of the courthouse, stood frozen in disbelief as his boss was led away in handcuffs. "This is an outrage," Stones declared, his voice cracking with indignation. "I demand immediate counsel and a hearing before a neutral magistrate." "You'll have both, Your Honor," the agent assured him, emphasizing the title with subtle irony. "The warrant includes provisions for your immediate appearance before Judge Keller in the Eastern District." Bondi remained perfectly still, her face betraying no emotion as her longtime adversary was escorted past her table. When Stones paused directly in front of her, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "You've orchestrated this circus from the beginning," he accused, his voice low but intense. "This won't stand." "The evidence orchestrated it, Judge Stones," she replied quietly. "The same evidence you refused to consider in dozens of cases that came before you." The federal agents resumed guiding Stones toward the exit. As they reached the doors, a court administrator rushed in, clearly flustered. "I've just been informed by the Chief Judge that all of Judge Stone's active cases are to be immediately reassigned," he announced, avoiding eye contact with the handcuffed judge. "And the sealed indictment against him has been published to the court's public docket." Reporters bolted from the courtroom, racing to break the story. At the defense table, Harrington's attorneys looked shell-shocked, whispering hurriedly with their clients. A junior prosecutor approached Bondi with a tablet displaying a breaking news alert. "Federal judge arrested in corruption probe. Attorney General Bondi exposes years-long bribery scheme." "Would you like to issue a statement, ma'am?" the young attorney asked. Bondi shook her head. "The indictment speaks for itself. Our job is to present the evidence in court, not in the press." The courtroom was gradually emptying, but the nervous energy remained palpable. Courthouse staff who had witnessed the arrest stood in huddled groups, processing the unprecedented event. 2 senior judges had appeared in the doorway, conferring urgently with the court administrator. One of Bondi's deputies approached with an update. "Judge Montgomery has been assigned to take over the Harrington case. She scheduled a status conference for tomorrow morning." Bondi nodded, gathering her files methodically. "Prepare the full evidence binders for her review tonight, and make sure the witness list is updated to include the former clerks." As she prepared to leave, Bondi paused to look at the now empty judge's bench. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing the weight of what had just transpired. "Justice doesn't belong to anyone," she murmured, almost to herself. "Not to judges, not to prosecutors, not even to me." Her team waited respectfully until she straightened her shoulders and turned toward the door. "Let's go," she said firmly. "We have a case to prepare." By late afternoon, video footage of Judge Stones being escorted from the federal courthouse had gone viral. Captured on a court reporter's smartphone, The 12-second clip showed the once powerful judge, handcuffs glinting under fluorescent lights, being guided into a waiting federal vehicle, his expression a mixture of shock and simmering rage. Within hours, the footage would appear on every major news network in the country. Inside the courthouse, a different kind of shock settled over the remaining spectators. Court personnel moved in slow motion, as if struggling to process the seismic shift in their normally structured world. Several clerks who had worked under Stones for years stood in tight clusters, their whispered conversations punctuated by nervous glances toward his empty chambers. "In 23 years on the bench," one veteran bailiff murmured, "I've never seen anything like it. Never." The defense attorneys for Harrington Industries had retreated to a conference room, doors firmly closed. Through the frosted glass, their agitated silhouettes could be seen gesturing emphatically. Every few minutes, someone would emerge to make urgent phone calls before disappearing back inside. Pam Bondi had established a temporary command center in a small room adjacent to the courtroom. Her team worked with quiet efficiency, processing documents and preparing for the case's transition to Judge Montgomery. Despite the victory against judicial corruption, the underlying prosecution of Harrington Industries remained their primary focus. "Ma'am," said her chief of staff quietly, "the Attorney General of the United States is on line 1. Bondi took the call privately, her expression revealing nothing as she listened. When she emerged a few minutes later, her team looked up expectantly. "The Public Integrity Section will handle Stone's prosecution," she announced. "We'll continue focusing on Harrington. The cases will proceed in parallel." Outside the courthouse, a media circus had formed with remarkable speed. Satellite trucks lined the street, and reporters delivered breathless updates against the backdrop of the imposing federal building. Legal analysts were already being patched in to provide context for what many were calling an unprecedented moment in judicial history. To see a sitting federal judge arrested in his own courtroom, one commentator explained, isn't just rare, it's essentially unheard of in modern American jurisprudence. As Bondi finally exited the building, a wall of cameras and microphones confronted her. She paused briefly on the courthouse steps, her expression resolute, before descending into the swirling chaos of flashing lights and urgent voices. The weight of justice and its price was written across her face. Afternoon sunlight stretched across the courthouse steps, casting long shadows behind Attorney General Pam Bondi as she faced the gathered press. Was this arrest planned all along? One reporter shouted. "Did you provoke Judge Stones deliberately to build your case?" Another demanded. "Was the judge targeted because of his political connections?" Bondi raised a hand, and the questions subsided. For several seconds, she stood silently, weighing her words with the same measured precision she'd shown in a court. "Today's events represent neither a victory nor a tragedy," she finally stated, her voice steady. "They represent our justice system working as it should. No one, regardless of position, power, or title, stands above the law." She declined to answer further questions, promising a formal press conference the next morning. As she descended the steps, cameras captured an image that would appear on front pages nationwide, a composed prosecutor who had faced down judicial corruption and emerged resolute, if somber. Behind her, the courthouse loomed as it always had, imposing and permanent. Yet within those walls, something had shifted. In courtrooms throughout the building, judges grew uncharacteristically silent, their gavels stilled as the implications of Judge Stone's spectacular fall reverberated through the halls of justice. Chapter 8. Fallout and public reaction. By the following morning, Judge Andrew H. Stone's arrest had transformed from breaking news into a full-blown national sensation. Morning shows led with the story. Legal blogs crashed under the flood of traffic. Social media lit up with hashtags like Judge in Cuffs and Bondi's bravery. This represents a pivotal moment in judicial accountability, declared the Judicial Ethics Review Board in a hastily released statement. The allegations, if proven, demonstrate the critical importance of transparency and oversight within our federal court system. In Washington, D.C., congressional leaders from both parties issued cautious statements supporting the investigation, while still emphasizing the presumption of innocence. But behind closed doors, a more contentious debate was already underway, lawmakers weighing potential reforms to how judges are vetted and held to account. At 9 a.m. sharp, Bondi stood before a bank of microphones in the Justice Department's briefing room, flanked by her prosecution team and representatives from the FBI's Public Corruption Division. Her voice calm and deliberate, she outlined the evidence that had led to Stone's arrest. The evidence suggests a pattern of judicial misconduct spanning more than 5 years, she explained. It includes documented communications with defendants, financial transactions coinciding with favorable rulings, and deliberate efforts to sabotage prosecutions involving specific entities. She confirmed the investigation had begun months earlier, triggered by whistleblower reports from former law clerks troubled by Stone's handling of corporate cases. Asked why she had personally argued the Harrington case despite knowing of the investigation, Bondi didn't hesitate. "Justice doesn't work if prosecutors retreat from difficult courtrooms," she said firmly. "My job was to present the government's case against Harrington Industries with the same vigor and integrity I would bring to any prosecution, regardless of which judge presided." Across town, Judge Stone appeared before Magistrate Judge Keller for his initial hearing. Gone were his black judicial robes. He wore a grey suit that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. His normally commanding presence was gone, replaced by hunched shoulders and a downcast gaze as he entered his not guilty plea. The magistrate set bail at $5 million, a figure that drew audible murmurs from the gallery, and ordered Stone to surrender his passport. The judge, who had once mocked attorneys from the bench, now sat silent, his attorneys' pleas for leniency rejected. By mid-afternoon, the first political dominoes began to fall. 2 senators, who had once championed Stone's judicial nomination, announced they were returning campaign contributions linked to Harrington Industries. The committee that had originally vetted Stone's appointment launched an internal review of its processes. At the State Bar Association, an emergency ethics panel convened to debate the broader implications of the arrest. "This case will be taught in law schools for generations," one panelist remarked. "It's a textbook example of why judicial temperament matters just as much as legal knowledge." For Bondi, the media frenzy brought both professional accolades and personal challenges. Security around her was quietly increased after several threatening messages were received. Yet for every threat, there were dozens of notes of support, from attorneys who had endured Stone's courtroom scorn, from law students inspired by Bondi's poise under pressure, from citizens heartened to see that even the most powerful could be held to account. Late that night, as the news cycle finally began to move on, Bondi sat alone in her office, reviewing briefs for the Harrington case. On her desk, a discarded newspaper headline caught her eye: "The judge who mocked until the handcuffs clicked." She set the paper aside and returned to her work. The spectacle was over, but the real work, methodically building the case against corporate corruption, continued. It would never draw the same headlines as a judge in handcuffs, but it was the work that had brought her to that courtroom in the first place. In courthouses across America, judges took the bench the next morning, with a new awareness of the scrutiny they faced. Some welcomed it as a necessary check on judicial power. Others resented it as a challenge to their integrity. But none could deny that the landscape had changed. As for Andrew H. Stone, his name had already been removed from the door of Courtroom 7A. In its place hung a plain printout reading Courtroom 7A, a small but telling symbol of how even the most entrenched power could dissolve when justice finally caught up.